everyone, welcome back to Beach Blitz. Thank you so much for Rachel for her really interesting talk on numerical scouting methods. It was fantastic, and I definitely learned a lot and opened my mind to some new ideas. Next up, we have our good friend Megan from Team 971, Spartan Robotics, who's here to talk about crafting your team story. She's been doing this for a lot of years, and I'm so excited to see what she has to say and what we can learn from this. So Megan, take it away, and we'll ask questions at the end. If people have questions, feel free to put it on our Discord or on Twitch. So take it away, Megan.
Thanks, Icron. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I hope you're all hanging in there during these wild times, but I'm looking forward to presenting and sharing what I have to say about crafting your team story. Just a little bit about me before we begin. I started on a robotics team my sophomore year in high school. The team fell apart after our first year, and then I joined 3309, the Firebots, and I was a student there from 2015 to 2016. And then when I graduated from high school, I went to UC Berkeley, a big part because of the work I had done on 3309 and in robotics in general. My plan there was not to do robotics, but like all well-made plans, sometimes things change. And I became a mentor for 971 just because they had such cool outreach and they had been a team for so long. And this is never something that they had considered for them, but I realized, and the community also recognizes that they do a lot of amazing work. So I just knew that with my abilities and the story that they had to tell, it was worth telling. So this presentation is really designed to help you write and communicate, and it's like the secret sauce to life. Because if you can communicate, you can help others understand where you're coming from and why. Today, after graduating from UC Berkeley, I'm working as a provider development representative at a company called Service Channel. It's cool to be an adult. It happens to everyone. So with that being said, I will get going. Hope everyone can see my screen okay. We're all good. Awesome. So the point of this talk is to say that the better that you are at sharing your story and helping others with theirs, the more opportunities you will have to accomplish your own aspirations. It's like the Krabby, I tell people this is like the secret formula in Krabby Patties, right? Like this is the thing that makes what you're eating delicious. And that's kind of how I see stories and how if you are good at communicating, how people can find you. I also want to say that I'm not a professional in any regard. Like I'm not an author. I don't, I'm not to like take away from my own accomplishments, but I still have a lot of learning to do. And I'm just sharing what I've gathered along the way. I've been a tour guide for UC Berkeley. I've helped my students accomplish their aspirations by helping them feel confident in sharing their stories. So this is just me sharing what I've learned in that process. So I just want to have you all keep that in mind. So maybe this is simple, but there are three aspects. I think there are at least three aspects to every story. And if you can cover these well, people will really understand what you're trying to say. There's the what happens, the plot, how things progress. I guess that's kind of leading into number two, the how. It's like, how did these things happen? What were the factors that made them happen and how you cover them? And then the why. So why do you want to share your story? What's the point? And this is kind of how I'm going to structure my talk today is how do you gather. The first thing here is like the what, what are you going to say? What's your story going to be? The second is how you're going to tell it. And the third reason is why. So that's just to give you a little overview of what the rest of this presentation is going to look like. I have gotten the feedback before that the way that I try and retell situations is complicated. So this meme here is to show that sometimes, yeah, being simple is great, but you miss out on a lot of the fun and a lot of what makes things complicated and interesting when you just go from the start to finish. So while being complex is a double-edged sword, this is where people get really excited. Like you can kind of compare the story of the Three Little Pigs and Game of Thrones, right? Like those are two completely different stories, and they have their own morals and their own strengths, and they're two vastly different ways of telling, getting your point across. But you kind of just want to find a sweet spot for what works best for what you're trying to say and how. Maybe this is something that you've seen in an English class before, like in high school, but protagonists go through the hero's journey. This is something really famous that you may have seen before. You have the call to adventure, you know, the reason that you begin your journey. Sometimes like there's like fairies that help you. You can kind of think about all of the basic fables that you know. They kind of follow this. Maybe like Cinderella is a really good example. And just think about how you would lay out your own narrative when you're competing for things like chairmans or speaking with judges. I don't know if you've seen the panel that myself and several other chairman's mentors were on yesterday, but the biggest thing in competing for chairmans is being able to tell the journey of your team and talk about your outreach as it fits into your team's story. So I would recommend, like, maybe even just for fun, like think about how you would basically write the book of your team. Like, what would that outline look like? And you can use these headings here to help you. The next slide I'm going to focus on is this part, the challenges and temptations, because this is really where all of life's up and downs come from. And this is something that I think we forget is on platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and basically any other social media, it looks like the trajectory of your life is just from start to finish, and like it looks like you got from here to there. But maybe in like my young adulthood, I've learned that life is much more tumultuous than that and really just a bigger roller coaster. And that's kind of the meat and potatoes of your story. It's like, what are the challenges you're facing and how do you overcome them? And that's probably the biggest part of the hero's journey that you want to focus on, because after that, then it's like, how did you face them? So you can really just think about this as like where the challenges and temptations are the things that you as a team, the problems that you as a team want to solve. And then the other part from transformation to the return is like how you actually solve those problems. And then really laying out like why those are the problems you want to solve and how you went about them can be a really effective way to compete for things like chairmans or other awards in FRC. And just in life in general, like if you're doing an interview for a job or writing a personal statement at school, you can really think about like, what is the path that I'm on and why am I on this journey? Like that's probably the single most question people are going to ask you for the rest of your life. That's the question that I've been asked when I applied to Cal and when I applied for my first job. So just definitely want to think about that as moving forward. And this slide just kind of gives more content to what I was saying. I'm a very visual person, so a lot of this presentation is mostly photos, images, and that's kind of what I was going for because that's how I like to communicate. But this slide here is just to say, sorry, skipping ahead. It's just to show like you want to pick, like I mentioned, pick and choose the highs and lows you want to emphasize. Be sure your audience understands you. What do they need to know? And then make your passion the loudest points. And that's really me emphasizing how you face your challenges and what are the solutions that you have for them. Because if you can, I don't know, I can think back to the problems that I've solved, and the way, and explaining how I've solved them has been something I've been proud of, and something that you really want to let shine when you're either presenting for chairmans, or talking to judges in the pits, or in the future, or online. This slide, I know it's a little peculiar, but now I'm going to move into like characters and how you can think about and how this relates to your team. There can be vastly different types of characters. Like if you think about what's his name? Keanu Reeves from The Matrix, versus the old man from Up. They have very different problems that they're facing and very different choices. And that's kind of how FRC teams are. Every team has a unique circumstance and has a unique set of problems that they need to face. And so you can have your own challenges, and you want to pick what's best for you. Whether it's like choosing to, like, for example, 971 would have a very different set of problems or community outreach compared to even 3309 or a team in the Midwest or in China. And so you really want to just think about like your own story and relating it to what the judges are looking for, or like not what the judges are looking for in the sense, but like what's it going to take for them to care about what you have to say. And this slide also goes to show like you can't do it alone. Like Keanu, I'm blanking on his name for some reason, but somebody can remind me in the Q&A portion. In the Matrix, like Keanu Reeves, he had help, and so did Russell, and so did Mr. Fredrickson and Doug. Like you're never in this alone. You have a whole team beside you, and you really want to leverage that. Because communities are really powerful, and the more that you can kind of find the unifying narrative that your whole team shares, the more compelling it will be, even if your stories are vastly different from, say, the team next door to you. And then you want to share the perspectives involved. You want to focus on, like I mentioned, what makes the parties involved interesting and compelling. Emotion can be really valuable here, because that's something everybody has, like, well, not everybody, but most people have them, and conveying how you feel about something is what makes people remember what you had to say. You can also think of empathy as a tool, and you really want to compare what's compelling and what isn't. Like, for example, 971 is based in the Silicon Valley. So there are lots of sponsors like Google, Apple, very high tech companies. And so 971 could definitely say like, yo, we have, not like this, but could definitely could be perceived as something like they have more money or whatever it is. But rather than going off of like the financial aspects, we want to talk about how we leverage those connections to help other people. How would you really want to put yourself in the judge's shoes, or whoever you're communicating to, and put yourself in their perspective and think, how would they feel about what you have to say? Because you definitely don't want to rub people the wrong way, and you definitely want to be as humble and gracious as possible. And also the next aspect of a story is the setting. You really want to describe where you're from and how, like I mentioned, how that faces the problems that you're solving. You also want to focus on like what's unique about the community you're from. 971's another, like I'm just using them as an example because that's my team, and definitely don't want to speak for anyone else, but you want to think about what's unique about where you're from. There are plenty of teams in the Silicon Valley. There are also a couple other teams in Mountain View, but we are one of the few teams from Mountain View High School, and it's reflected in who's on our team and the things that we care about. I mean, that's going to vary, and it's going to make, if you can help convey that, it'll make people remember you and what you have to say. And then you can also think about your community as what you want to add. Like what do you think is missing around you, and um, how can you make a difference there? So Mountain View is another good example, just because I will just keep coming back to 971. But you can think like 971, there's we could definitely do more outreach to the Avid community or Latinx folks. And so that's good outreach and meaningful to us, because we obviously care about people, but you want to think about what you can add, versus like maybe starting a bunch of FRC teams wouldn't be best for 971 because there are lots of other teams in the Bay Area. So it just really varies. Like from the Shire, from the Hobbit, or to like the Galaxy Milky Way. You really just, or like Star Trek versus Lord of the Rings. So just think about where you fit in, and how that makes a difference to first, and to your team in general. I'm just going to skip this to go straight to the how. This is kind of the biggest portion of the presentation because I think it's the most challenging and something that takes the most practice. Like this is a skill I'm continuously working on. This is a skill that I help other students work on. And the better that you get at this, the better you can be in life in general. So I will just mention something I hope you've either seen before, but this is definitely something you will see later on in the future. There are 3 aspects to rhetoric. According to this theory, based off of Aristotle, this like ancient philosopher guy, there are 3 aspects to rhetoric: the strategy of how you communicate. How credible are you? How trustworthy should I believe what you have to say? And how is this person telling me? Ethos. And then logic, the reasoning or the facts, the figures. This is like the data. This is the executive summary and the chairman's submission. So these are the ways that you measure your impact and how. And then the emotion. Why are you solving those problems? What are the anecdotes? What can you tell me about the student that you talked to at a demo? What can you tell me about the FRC team who you mentor? Like, why does what you do make a difference in terms of like the impact that you can have on more than just the numbers, but on the stories and the history of your team? So I will go over all 3 of them in the sort of brief detail. But before I do that, I do also want to say that there should be an overall mission in what you want to say. There should be a really clear and concise way of communicating what your team is about. In chairman's, there's the I'm just going to use this example, but the essay should really be is really laying that out. What's the golden thread? I think this is even more than a thesis, because a thesis is like one single statement that you're trying to back up throughout the whole essay. And the golden thread is that, but it's like it's the singular most thing you want the judges or anybody you're trying to convince of something to get away with. You want them to really understand why you're doing what you're doing and what are the things you're doing that backed it up. And if you can nail this and you can make it really compelling, this is what like some of the best Hall of Fame teams can do really well. I mean, the example I can think of right now is 3132. Their mission of getting first everyone, getting first everywhere, everyone everywhere is compelling because first is impactful, and they had the outreach to back that up. So and it's clear and concise. So while you don't necessarily need like a catchphrase or like it doesn't need to be your team's like not mission statement, but you would want it to be what your team is all about. So it is sort of like a mission statement. And if you nail this, it's like this baby that I have here, where instead of ordering 10 piece nuggets, and you get 11. So you get, it's like that bonus point that really puts you over the top. And then before you even have people to do this, you can think about recruitment. Like how are you even going to get people to be the ones to say this? Because, you know, build season is time consuming. Robotics is busy, and, you know, it is an engineering program. So a lot of times the focus on communication can be put on the back burner. But this is where some of the biggest value in robotics comes in, is because first students have experience sharing and communicating. So I also think that it's a really good like awards and pitches or business plans are also really good ways to get people who may not otherwise be interested in robotics interested. So you can reach out to speech and debate, journalism, drama, sports. Who are the people that are dynamic and who want to branch out into something different? You know, who are the people that need a helping hand, or who are the people that just need a team or a family to be a part of? Those are some of the best people to reach out to work on your award submissions, or any other sort of business type things on your team, because they can be the most grateful. I know that I necessarily didn't always enjoy like math as much as my friends, but I knew that I could write, and I knew that I could speak, and I knew that I was passionate about the work that we were doing. And so that's how I found my niche, is because I wasn't so interested in like designing, and, you know, I tried it and wasn't really for me, but I knew that we were doing something meaningful, and people in your community, the better you can share that with the people in your community, the more support you can get on your team. Other ways that are really useful for building up your business team can be parents. Parents who want to help out but don't really know how. Grant writing, lawyers, business people, anybody who can read and write, because sometimes even just having somebody who wants to be there can be the biggest thing. I don't think there are many barriers to entry to you know, create a Google sheet that goes over your team's outreach. You know, it's not like you don't really need a college degree to do that. So this can be a really powerful way to do that. And you can, if you've seen the movie Moneyball, like use the data that you have on your school and like the information that you have to make decisions that are not just based off of like trust or old relationships. Not that those aren't valuable, but you can just go out and find people based off of who needs the most help, or who's just looking for something to be involved in. And like I mentioned, like this is where the people who are sharing your story, that's where the emotion is going to come into. Like this is how you can build that emotional connection, is through the people that are on the front lines of sharing what your team is all about. So think about speaking to judges previously in the pits, probably some virtual format online, and just use those to really connect to people. And then once you have a team dedicated, you can start making a list of all of your outreach. Other teams have various strategies for this, but you want to go over the things that are really impactful, like your team demographics, your scholarships, how many people attended the event you put on, how long your sponsors have been on your team. You can also really collect qualitative data here about asking yourself, parents, mentors, and other students, what are our favorite things to do? If you could have like, why do we like doing this? How did this start? I liked the second question. I would ask a bunch of people this all the time, like some journalists, like if you could only have 3 words to describe your team, what would they be? And like really, you can just really simmer over these questions for a bit, and just rest and sit with them and really digest them to get an idea of like what you do matter, like what are you doing that has to do with your larger story. Starting with this list is building up the logos part of the rhetorical triangle. You're building the reasoning and argumentation, the facts, figures, the case studies, the data. This is the data, this is the information that shows that you have an impact. And then speaking towards the credibility aspect of the triangle, you can, if you're submitting for chairmans, you can follow please, I encourage you to follow the definitions provided by FIRST. These are established so that teams can really demonstrate the impact that they have. You want to lay out like the team's contributions for the projects. Don't exaggerate, be truthful, say things how they are, because I guarantee you it will come back to haunt you. And if people don't trust what you have to say, then it's really hard to get what you have across. So think about being really accurate and precise in your team's impact and how you're saying what you're saying. The next couple slides are about ways that you can get better at communicating in terms of writing. So if you're like writing a business plan, your personal statements, any sort of essays, a really good way to get better at that is by reading. I know that people are busy and it's hard to pick up a book sometimes because we all have things going on in our lives. But if this is something that you really want to do, and if this is something that you feel like you want to get better in, read. Like it doesn't really matter so much what you're reading, just read. Just read. Like I can't say this enough because speaking from my personal experiences, my writing has improved because of the books that I've read. And I have some photos here of books that are like specifically about words and grammar. And like, these are awesome and they're great resources. Word by Word isn't really like a how to get better writing sort of book, but it really goes over like the history of words and like how people who work for dictionaries go about creating the definition. So that's just something interesting I read a couple of years ago that you might like. The elements of style is like a classic, this is how you write a sentence. This is the proper use of who versus whom. So like if you know somebody who's maybe just even learning English, it may even be useful for them because English is a complicated language. And then the next book, Word Power Made Easy. This isn't something that I've actually read, but my roommate has, and he really enjoys it because it's like, you can think about it's kind of like a dictionary almost, but you pick it up and you flip to a page and you learn an interesting word. So the better that you build up your vocabulary, the better you can be at being concise and clear. And it's so much fun to be fancy, and it's so much fun to use words like trepidatious or, like it can really make a difference, especially in your credibility, if you can just be really concise and clear. Also, the more that you read, the more that you can use other topics and other stories to supplement what you have to say. So, we talk about copy, cheat, and steal, robot designs, like, just take what somebody else has and apply it and make it your own. I really do think that this is a really good strategy and in writing and in communication, because if you don't have to start from scratch. There are different types of creativity, and one of them is actually taking topics you've seen before and applying them in new ways. Somebody who's really good at this is Aaron Hill. You can check out his BattleBot team, Tantrum, and Seems Reasonable. and you can literally just DM them. And if you're curious about like how their crazy robot designs look and what they feel like, definitely do that. But copy, cheat, and steal also applies to communication as well. Figurative language is also something that can be really useful, because there are lots of metaphors that we actually use in our daily lives that don't really seem like metaphors. So seeing is knowing. Like, have you ever tell someone, oh, I see you, or like, I see what you're saying? You can't, unless you're reading, you don't actually see what they're saying, but you use that metaphor because you understand what they're trying to say. So this can actually, like, the book that I listed here, Metaphors We Live By, is a class I took at Berkeley. Really good class. It was really fun to think about all the ways that we've kind of constructed things that are really that are similar but aren't, just because of the cognitive ability of humans. But definitely have fun with it. And sometimes you can start with something that doesn't seem like it makes sense and really just build off of it. For example, 125 a couple years ago in their chairman's presentation had a tree, had like a tree metaphor that was really cool. You want to think about like ways that you can compare your team's story to something else. 971, when we won chairman's in 2017, had a whole space theme in our presentation. So it's like you can use figurative language to help you come up with themes. So you can also just think about it as a tool that will convey thoughts and feelings simply and concisely. Okay, so once you have something written or once you have a presentation, you can build your story like you would a robot. You want to be as strategic as you can. And honestly, writing, or in my experiences, writing for me has really followed this process. What's the question I have to answer? Do I have all the facts and figures to do that? Brainstorm, lay out your outline, have a rough draft, read your rough draft 1,000 times. Is it good? Is it good? Go back, keep going back. So it's literally the same thing. And I think people forget that. Like, people think that you start from scratch, but I highly recommend applying the engineering thought process to other aspects of your life, because while it may not be fun to have a prototype that doesn't work, adjust your prototype and keep working on it. You want to rewrite your drafts as many times as you can, because it's rare that you have something that's good on the first try. Like, you may have a good concept, but you really want to try and be concise and clear as possible. But another big impediment to people communicating well is that they get stuck on what they're supposed to say and when. But just, if you start with something, it's better than nothing. And if you start with something, it can be reworked constantly. You also want to have as many eyes and perspectives share their thoughts on what you're pitching or what you're writing. That way you get an idea of what the kind of questions people will have on your work or on your presentation. That way you'll be prepared to make it more palatable for different types of audiences, or you're going to nail like your communication to your audience way better because you were able to talk it out with someone who was similar, fit that demographic ahead of time. So that's just like a little bit of like marketing information. But rough drafts are rough, and they're rough because they're hard and because they can get better and smoother over time. And also another thing is that you can use like the art that you have around you to be inspired. This is a piece of art by Kehinde Wildley. He did the portrait of, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, but he did the portrait for Barack Obama. Really beautiful. I just also like to share art as much as I can, because you can like fuel that to share your stories. Hamilton and like books like the Double and the Gambler and the Iliad inspire movies. Like these, art doesn't live in like a microcosm, and you can use what's around you to make your own story better. You can think about Hamilton and like his scrappy need to write, and how that may be similar to like a scrappy rookie team coming out from nowhere. And like you can make these stories fun and compelling just based off of other things that you've seen before. The more you see, the better you get. And I think that's just something that's true in life in general. Like the more you can pursue your interests and the more that you can build on your skills, the better you'll be. So it's just about immersing yourself in the world we live in. Okay, so now for why this is important. Why is this the secret sauce? And I think, especially in the times we're living in with the rise of technology and this sort of like silicon industrial revolution we're living in, art can kind of be put on the back burners. Like, and we're on robotics teams, we're sponsoring science, technology, education, and math. But without the storytellers, without the people who keep a record and who persuade, then what's it all for? So I think this is just the other side of the coin, and you can't have one without the other. So it's a balance. And the better that you are, like I mentioned earlier, the better that you're crafting. I'm about to show you like why this is something you want to be good in, and why this is something that I think matters to not just myself or students on my team, but students everywhere. Maya Angelou said that at the end of the day, people will remember what you said or did. They will just remember how you made them feel. And I think that's something, like, I think that's what stories do. They tell you about events, they tell you about things that happened in a way that makes you remember it. And it's not the details that people remember, it's like why you're doing what you're doing and why it mattered to you. So just think about like the connections that you're building with people, because robotics is not just like it's not just a program where you learn how to build robots. Yeah, you do, but you also have a whole community that you're connected to. And I think stories are the record that we keep of that. And when teams submit for chairmans and when you're doing other awards in FRC, you're working on creating that record for your team. You're creating the history for people that are going to be, that could be on your team after you or before you. And you're carrying on the legacy for the people that came before you. So yeah, I could go on forever about that. But I also think stories and building on the communication and business side of your team makes your team more diverse. And that's really the world we're living in. We need different types of people to help us solve challenging problems, because there's not like, you can't just have all the people who like doing, I mean, you can, but if you do, you're missing out on all the different colors and all the different types of ways that there are to solve problems. I have, I don't know if you've seen Star Trek before, but I'm a really big nerd, so this is something I like and something in my family. But Captain Kirk is like the emotion. He's the leader. He's the captain of the Enterprise. Yada yada. His first officer Spock. He's Vulcan, so he's all about logic and science and all of that. And Dr. McCoy is the doctor, so he's like, trying to keep people safe. He's like, Jim, why are Captain Kirk, why are we doing this? And he fights with Spock all the time. But they travel the galaxy together. They solve problems together. They can't do it without each other. So they need each other to solve their missions and to keep the crew of the Enterprise going. So Captain Kirk couldn't just do it all on his own. And I think that's how robotics teams work too. You know, there's the Enneagram. It's kind of like a woo, like a personality thing. It's kind of fun. INFP, you know, like they aren't really like different types of people in psychology, but you can just think about like the things that you like, or and I have this photo of all these birds because, you know, they help make the world beautiful, and they're different ways of solving problems. So you just want to think about the ways that you can include different people of different colors, interests, backgrounds, and just how they can add that to your team. And part of sharing your team story is bringing all of this together. And then, like I mentioned before, this is so that others can, if you have a record of the things that you've done as a team and the things that matter to you, you can have others tell your story going forward. Like, it's so cool I mean, it's just inspiring, not even cool, it's just inspiring to look back on the things that you've done and have, you know, the facts, the figures, and the anecdotes that back all that up. You know, like we actually, first teams do a lot of really, like, whether you know it or not, just by being on a first team, you're doing something meaningful. And you don't want to lose that. And I think sharing your, like, crafting your team story and working on it helps preserve it, because stories live, you know, like we go back to the Iliad, like it's a classic book. The Greeks are not the empire they used to be, but we have their story, and that's not even something, but we just have a record of it. And we know that, like, you know, the Greek gods didn't exist or whatever, but like the story didn't happen as it's written in the Iliad, but we have like a record of these people and the things that they felt, and the things that they cared about, because we have their stories. And I think first is kind of similar in that regard. And also, like, just celebrate the things that make your team great, and the history that, like, the only photos here on 971, there's only 2 photos that I was on the team for, but it's so awesome to be able to look back and see the accomplishments and the people who worked, and like the people who came before you, and who are still there. Like, this is Parker, Austin, and no, this is Travis, Austin, and Parker, and like this is Travis coming back as a mentor. This is in this top. These are 2 971 alumni who were students back in like 2009 or in 2013. So there's like when you join a first team, you have the opportunity to actually like just be part of something greater, and having your story shares that. So pretty awesome. And I kind of miss robots right now, as I bet all of you do. But that's all I have for you today. And thank you so much for letting me talk in this.
Thank you so much, Megan. Could you stop screen sharing so we could see your face?
Yes.
Awesome. So just quick clarification. So that guy's name is Neo.
I knew that.
It's like the
That
motor.
was my first instinct. And The Matrix is actually one of my favorite movies, but
All right.
Like, yeah.
Before we get started with the questions, I actually had like a comment. I actually love the parallel that you make between like using the engineering iterative design process and like tying that together with your essays. I think that's something that's like hard for like especially like STEM oriented students like to think about, right? Because they see like STEM and English or like writing or communicating completely different, but they're like, you know, similar problem sets.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I've met a lot of people who are like, oh, what do you do on robotics? Like, you work on an award, like you do business. And like, yeah, but they miss out on like actually how simple, like you can do it all.
That makes sense. So we have a couple of questions from Twitch, and if people have more questions, feel free to keep on asking them, and we'll try to get to them. So the first question we have from Hannah is: should stories be from the perspective from your perspective, or from the perspective of your team? Do you have a preference here, or do you think there's like a better way to approach this? What are your thoughts?
I think it depends on the context. Like, if you're doing if you're writing a chairman's essay, you want that to be from the perspective of your team. But if you're presenting or if you're talking to judges in the pits, you want that to be from the student's perspective. Maybe if you're doing something more business oriented, like creating a business plan or pitching to a sponsor, you want that to be a little bit more team oriented, and you kind of just want to flavor it with the personal anecdotes in those types of situations.
That makes sense. The next question we have is from Elise Chu. So this question is, how do you choose what kind of outreach is best for writing your story about?
Yeah, and I think this is a really good question, because this is something a lot of people struggle with at first. You want to choose the things that make your team excited and have the largest impact in your community. So like, I just want to compare and contrast 971 and 3132 again, because they have different problem sets ahead of them, and had different outreach to do that. Like 971 is a Silicon Valley, Bay Area team. And we liked, designing parts and creating things that other teams can use. But 3132 was in Australia and had to build first in their area. So it's really just like solving the problems that are in front of you and having the facts to back that up.
That makes sense. I think yesterday, I'm by no means am I expert on this compared to you, but yesterday on your panel for Chairman's Award, I think something interesting that has stuck with me and has been in my mind for the last day. It's something about how the things that stuck the most with their kids were when they did outreach and events with people that looked like their families or were like their families, and that's just been in my head the last day.
Yeah, I resonate with that as well.
Thank you, Hannah. Hannah also had some good comments for you, so thank you. Actually, I have a question. Are there any team stories that you've heard in the past that have stuck with you? It could be chairman's related, or I guess not even related to your specific teams, but just something that you've seen out there in the world, and how has it resonated with you? If you don't have a good answer for this, we can come back to it or move on.
I really like 118. I think they do so much for the community, and they have such an awesome story that, but they're not but when people think of them, they don't think of them as an award sort of team. People can correct me if I'm wrong, but I just love the way that they use their connection with NASA to really be a pillar in our community.
What's really interesting is I think yesterday, during COVID, they've been doing virtual pit sessions. So they actually had a virtual pit session during Beach Blitz yesterday, and I thought that was very cool. That that they keep on doing things regularly.
Yeah,
that's a good answer. Another thing I was just kind of thinking of is kind of related, but your talk was geared towards telling your team story. But how do you think everything that you said today relates to writing a Dean's List essay, or for our seniors out there who are writing college essays right now?
I think a lot of the what and the how still applies. You want to think about who your audience is and the challenges that you faced, and being really specific with them, and just being as honest and genuine as you can. I know it's really anxiety inducing to have to write 500 words on your entire high school history. But just have fun with it. This is the one time that you really get to just have fun telling who you are and being proud of the things that you've overcome, to be the person that you are. And I think when you do that in your personal statement and you focus more on you rather than the outcome, it's way better. It's just way better. And you just want to and just focus on the story, in general. This is something I wish I had said, but focus on the story, not the outcome you're trying to generate, because that's going to come if you do it well.
That makes sense. That seems like good advice. We have another question from Sir Walter Don on Twitch. And the question is, do you think inclusion would greatly help any community, not just FRC?
Oh, yeah. I mean, man, you could just think about politics in recent times. we have been a country for almost 250 years, and we finally have our first female vice president and person of color, biracial. And other countries like Germany, New Zealand, England have already had female leaders in the past. So yes, to answer your question 100%. But I'm encouraged, because first keeps me optimistic, because there are lots of people who are really passionate about solving challenging problems who come from different walks of life.
That sounds like a great response. The same person also said sending love from 7042, your dad's FRC team. So,
yeah, that is
before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say today, Megan? Any last words of advice or anything else that you'd like teams to hear?
I think being a nerd, I think nerds are gonna save the world. If you think about Alexander Hamilton, he was maybe he had his problems, but he was just somebody who loved to write and who loved to debate. Or people who started the people that we hail as heroes, like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and these sort of techie people. They like to solve problems and just capitalize on your curiosity and your willingness to pursue your passions. And I have faith we can solve the things that we're facing currently.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. I really enjoyed your talk as always. And I thank you so much for participating in Beach Blitz from the very beginning. So
yeah, thanks everybody. I hope everyone's hanging in there, and it was a pleasure.
All right.